what is this Mariners plan going to be this offseason? They could go a number of directions, but one direction that constantly gets brought up and then gets shot down almost immediately by whether it be Justin Hollander or Jerry Dipoto or anybody in that Mariners front office is like, okay, you're going to trade your starting pitching. It is the envy of every team in Major League Baseball to have this much young, controllable, great pitching. So, I mean, when you've got a surplus of it, you want to deal from that, right? Well, here was Justin Hollander last week with John Morosi at the GM meetings, throwing a wet blanket on anybody who might be thinking that.
I think when you have starters as good as we are, a lot of teams ask, and we almost always say no. we love our starting pitchers. They're the foundation of our team. They will give us a chance every night to go out and compete with the best teams in baseball. So I think that, for us, it's been a common question over the years, and mostly we've said, no, we like our starters. We're going to keep them.
So that's Justin Hollander saying thanks, but no thanks. We had Jerry Dipoto at the end of the season say that. It got me wondering, just kind of like, okay, if you take that off the table, then how are you going to improve this roster in, I would say, a dramatic way? Because you have seen basically the same season play out the last, 4 years with varying results. You made it to the playoffs in 2022, but all 4 years you have been in contention for that third wild card spot. And I would prefer the Mariners shoot a little higher. I would prefer them make a run at the division title rather than kind of settle for the wild card round. And I think a big way to do that is to just inject more talent into this roster, to make it a much more well-rounded operation where you're not relying simply just on Julio. But if trading your starting pitching is already off the table, which I think it's way too early to just say, no, we're not trading our starting pitching because there's so much of the offseason still to unfold, then how does this team get better?
I don't think if they are going to trade a starter, they're going to reveal that in that sense. No GM, no front office in any sport is going to be completely forthright with their plans. So I'm sure all permutations of how to get better have gone through the minds of Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander. And they know somewhere that it is more realistic to trade a starter than Plan Z. So I know that is there sitting as an option. Not the preferred option. They have reiterated that time and time again. But if it comes to it, and if the offer is right, it will happen. Not to say never. Now, maybe there is a starter or maybe a couple starters that they will just trade. They will not trade no matter what. Mm-hmm. We don't know who those guys are. Out of the 4 or 5 that they might consider protected, that they don't want to trade, I'm sure they have a couple that they just under no limits will trade. But if someone comes to you with a Juan Soto-like package of players and prospects, where when Juan Soto was traded from the Padres to the Yankees, and the Padres, they got this haul of players. And the Nationals did too. And anytime you trade for Juan Soto, you get a lot of pieces back. So
and your team seems to improve.
If someone came to them with some MLB-ready players and said, we will do this. We are a pitcher away. Say the Orioles came to them and said, we're a pitcher away. We have a glut of infield prospects. We'll trade you Jordan Westberg, and we'll trade you someone else and a prospect. Maybe they do that. The preferred path, though, if you're not going to trade a starter, and it does feel unlikely because I don't think any other team is going to come to them with an enticing enough package to make this team an immediate contender if you trade a starter, you have to go the prospect route. Another venue or another avenue that they have been a little bit hesitant to go away from. Outside of Luis Castillo, they've built back up the prospect pool, and they're
which
there.
I think is interesting because there is this hesitancy in the Mariners organization to deal from their treasure chest of prospects. But the one time they did it, Mike, the best example in recent times of when they did that was the trade for Luis Castillo, and that has worked out tremendously for them. And the team that they traded all those prospects to, the Reds, have not really reaped the benefits of any of those guys yet, and we're almost 3 years removed from that trade. I would think that would lend more evidence to do that. Like, hey, it worked out for you so great the one time you did it over the last 3 or 4 seasons. I mean, why not do it again?
And because all your good prospects are middle infielders.
Exactly.
And they've done a great job building it back up. So you won that trade because the only guy to make the majors for the Reds, Noelvi Marte, dealt with his own issues. He had that long suspension. So you can't say that's really panned out for Cincinnati yet. They certainly can take a more patient approach. But there are so many middle infielders, and if they're not ready, and my theory, I threw this out there, and wasn't the most well received by some smart baseball minds and Shannon and Charlie Furbush on Friday. I said, all right, if you're not going to trade your prospects and you're not going to trade a starting pitcher, then not rush, but expedite the timeline to bring up Cole Young or Colt Emerson, like opening day or first month of the season. And if that's not feasible, if you don't want to do that, then you have to trade your prospects. Right. And we're not saying trade Cole Young and Colt Emerson and everyone else. One and then maybe your other middle infielders. I mean, we could go down the list right now. Your top hitting prospects, all of your non-top pitching prospects are all middle infielders.
Right.
Except Harry Ford. But you have enough. You have 6 guys, all middle infielders. Where are they coming? Where are they going? They're not going to come up here in any cohesive timeline where you have the rest of this team intact. And if you only get 1 or 2 of those guys to come up, you still have all these other middle infielders that you have the flexibility to deal.
Yeah, you can't play with 6 infielders in your roster if they all make it to the big leagues and you don't either move them off their position or what have you. Like, there is no point in keeping all of these guys if they all play the same position. I mean, you talked about Harry Ford being a catcher. If the Mariners are able to extend Cal Raleigh,
there's no path for him.
Exactly. He's blocked too. Like, you don't have a top prospect in Harry Ford and say, okay, you're just going to be our backup catcher from here.
Was it Divish that last year told you guys, kind of around the trade deadline, that Harry Ford is most valuable as a trade piece because of that? Because he's not coming up to the Mariners anytime soon, unless you're moving his position, unless you're changing him into someone else.
Right.
So at that time, at the trade deadline, or even here in the near future, his value is tied up in the fact that he can be a catcher for someone else. So yeah, even if it might pain everyone to get rid of Harry Ford, bring someone back that can help this team immediately.
Right. And Harry Ford, a very likable kid, and we all fell in love with him and his performance in the World Baseball Classic in 2023. All those British kids, chanting his name in their school. That was really cool to see. But like you said, there just isn't a path for him right now. And so if there's not a path for one of your top prospects, I mean, what's the point in keeping him here other than just to have organizational depth in case something were to happen to Cal Raleigh, which, knock on wood, does not happen. I think the quickest way to bring in offensive talent here in Seattle is not via free agency, because I think you're going to have a very tough time convincing any hitter to come here, especially after seeing what Mitch Garver became after signing with the Mariners. That is going to be a very tough sell. But you know what you can do to not really have to convince somebody to come here is engage in a trade. And you can dangle that pitching and bring in a bat that is a significant piece. I mean, you mentioned a couple guys from the Orioles organization. I know Alec Boehm was a guy that the Phillies have kind of put on the trade market. He had a bad second half to the season last year, but historically has been really good at getting extra base hits. I believe he was an all-star, this last season too, after having a good first half of the season. But there are options out there that there are avenues out there that the Mariners can take if they want to do that. But it just seems like right now they have locked themselves into just these 5 guys as your starting rotation until who knows what happens.